video, we're going to talk about three things: an object having the focus, the tab order of the objects, and a shortcut known as mnemonics. So I've got a project I've already created as a C# Windows project. I've got my form. I'm going to take a label. I'm going to create a label. Let's set the text this label to last name with a colon. Move this down a little bit. And I'm going to take a text box and add a text box to the right. And I'll name that text box txt last name. Now what I'm doing is I'm creating a project that is going to get some data from a user. Let's say we're going to have them register for some type of webinar. And I want them to put in their last name, first name, maybe a student ID, and we'll say their major. And I'm going to get that information. I'm going to record that to a database somewhere. Or I'm also going to have a button where I can clear the items and the next student can enter their information. So it's just a simple data entry form. I'm going to take my label and my text box. I'm going to copy and paste. Oh, let's put this one up here. And I'm going to have to put their first name in. So I'm going to select the label and just change the label to first name. And actually I'm going to bring all of that down just a little bit. Let's paste another grouping here. Let's say I want to know what their major is. So I'll name this major. And we'll set this to txt major. And I didn't name this text box. Let's name it txt first name. And let's paste one more in. This will be the student ID. I'm going to put it up here. And for the label, we'll change that to student ID. And we'll just name this txt ID. And just to kind of show how this all works, I'm going to add some text in. So we'll put in student ID. We'll add in a first name. And of course their major will be computer science. Now I'm going to create a button. Text of my button is going to be submit, and we'll name this btn submit. I'm going to copy that button, and we'll have this one named btn clear, and the text will be clear form. So there's my data entry form. We haven't done any programming on these buttons yet, but I want to show you how the tab order works and show you what the focus is. So I'm going to go ahead and start this. So here's my project. Notice that the last name is highlighted. That's because this text box has the focus. Only one object can have the focus. And whatever object has the focus, if you type from the keyboard, that's where that text is going to go. The reason this has the focus is it was the first text box I created. Yes, I created the label first of last name, but labels do not get the focus. They simply pass the focus to the next object. We can tab between the different items using the tab key, and we'll tab between the items in the order that they were created, giving them the focus. So remember, we created the first name next, then we created the major, then we created the student ID, then we created the button for submit. You know, so it can get the focus as well. It gets a little blue border around it and a little dotted line on the outline. Tab again to clear form, and then tab another time. It's going to go back to last name. You see the cursor flashing in last name, first name, major, student ID. So I can highlight through those items that way. The problem is that's not the order that I want for the tab order. I want to be able to start in student ID, go to first name, last name, and then major. So that the focus is moving down that data form and then finally focusing on those two buttons. So here's how we change the tab order. I'm going to go back to my IDE. I'm going to go to the View menu, and about 3/4 of the way down you will find Tab Order. When we choose that, we get little boxes, blue boxes with numbers in them, white numbers, that show the tab order. And it starts with 0. So the tab order currently is this label, then 1 is my last name text box, then it goes to first name label, first name text box, major label, major text box, student ID label, TXT ID text box, and then submit and clear form. I can change the order simply by clicking. So I'm going to start up here with student ID. I'm going to click, notice that goes to 0. Then I'm going to click in the text box, that becomes 1. And it's going to go back through the order this way, changing the tab order. And when I get to the last one, they all turn blue, and you can now see the new order. Let's run this again. So now, student ID is the first item to get the focus, again because the label passes it to the next item. If I tab, it goes to first name. Tab again goes to last name. Tab again goes to major. Submit button, clear form. So that's how we can change the tab order and the objects that get the focus. Now when you have a lot of items in your form, it can sometimes be hard to see the cursor. It's easy to lose that maybe. Let's say we had 20 different data entry items. I want to be able to highlight which of these text boxes has the focus by making that text box yellow for the background. When it loses the focus, it goes back to being white. So I'm going to show you how to do that. By the way, to turn the tab order off, just simply go back to the View menu and untoggle tab order, and those numbers all disappear. So I'm going to take my 4 text boxes here, select each one of those, and now I'm going to go over to the Properties panel, but I'm going to click on the lightning bolt to go to the events. And when an item gets the focus, it's getting that when it receives an enter event. And that enter event can be when I tab to it or when I click on it. So I'm going to create an event handler that handles the enter event for those 4 text boxes. And I'm doing all 4 at once. I'm just going to call it received focus. And when I press the enter key, it's going to take me to the code for that. And I'll move my properties window back down. And so when received focus, I have this object named sender. And sender is the object that has received the focus in this case, or that has been entered into. And sender could be anything. I want to tell C# I'm going to treat this as a text box. So I'm going to create an object. I'm going to call it text box. I'm just going to name it TB, and I'm creating an object the same way we'd create a variable. So the data type, or in this case the object type, is a text box, naming it TB. And it's going to equal a text box conversion of sender. So I'm taking sender and I'm saying I'm going to convert this to a text box. Basically, I'm guaranteeing that the only objects that are going to receive this handler, are going to handle this procedure, received focus, will be a text box. And I'm going to treat them all as text boxes. Then I can say tb.backcolor equals color.yellow. Now I'm going to go back to my form. I still have those buttons selected. I'm going to go back to the Properties menu here. I want to do a leave event. So I go find leave. And I'll just call this one focus lost. By the way, there's a got focus and a lost focus. Might use a lot in VB. However, those are kind of reserved terms, so I changed it to received focus and focus lost. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing here. Again, I'm going to select my object as sender, but this time when it loses the focus, I want to set the back color to white. So I'm going to run this again. And now when it runs, you'll see the background is yellow for student ID text box. If I tab to the first name, it becomes yellow. If I click on the last name, it becomes yellow. Click on computer science, it becomes yellow. Notice as we move down the list, the previous one becomes white, so it's losing that focus. Let me go to the button, and again, if we tab back up to student ID, that's going to become yellow, or we can click in the fields. So that's how it gets the focus and how we can handle that enter event to help visually show which object currently has the focus. It's a nice thing to show your user. Okay, I want to create these buttons. So I'm going to come back to the design. I'm going to double click on submit. So we get a button handler for btn submit _ click. We're going to use the message box just so we can see how this works. But normally you'd probably want to put this information into a database of some sort. But we'll say message box.show, and I'm going to show their name. So I want txt first name .text. I'm going to concatenate to that a space, and concatenate to that txt last name .text. That'll be my prompt. For my title, I'm going to use txt id.text. And let us show the button working. Okay, so now I'm going to go back to my clear form, and here I want to clear those 4 text boxes. So we have txt student ID or txt ID. I can set the text equal to quote quote or a null string. I forgot my semicolon. That will empty that text box. And then txt first name, instead of setting the text to quote quote or a null string, I can simply use a method of the text box named clear. Does the exact same thing, simply clears the text. One way is not necessarily better than the other. And then what I want to do is have the focus go back into txt ID so that the user can then start typing at that point. So to give an object the focus, it's very simple. I give it the name of the object and call the focus method. Needs a set of parentheses since it's a method, and a semicolon. So let's test this. So if I click the submit button, I get the name John Smithton and the ID. But if I click the clear form, all those text boxes clear out. Student ID text box ends up getting the focus, the cursor's there, and it's also highlighted in yellow. And again, I could tab through these different items. So that's how we can give an item the focus and how we can clear a form very easily. Now I'm going to do one more thing, and that is mnemonics. Some people don't necessarily take their hands off the keyboard to go get a mouse to click on a button, though of course they can tab to a button and press the enter key. But we're going to create something called a key mnemonic. So here's how we do that. I'm going to go back to my design. So I'm going to click on the submit button. I'm going to go to the properties for the submit button, and in the text property, I'm going to put an ampersand, a shift 7 in front of the S for submit. And that makes the S a mnemonic. It means I can do an Alt S and be the same as clicking on that submit button. I'm going to do the same thing for clear form. I'm going to put my ampersand in front of the C for form. Now I'm going to do one more. I'm going to take this label, and I'm going to do an ampersand in front of L for last name. So now let's test our project. If I press the Alt key, you're going to see an underline under the S and the C and the L. It's showing you what the mnemonics are. If I do an Alt S, it's the same as clicking on Submit. If I do an Alt C, it's the same as clicking on the Clear Form button. And if I do an Alt L, it gives the focus to the last name text box. So the ampersand L of the last name label sends the focus to that label, but then passes the focus to the next text box. And that is key mnemonics. One thing to remember on mnemonics is you can't use the same letter more than once. That will simply confuse Visual Studio. So keep track of what mnemonics you are using. But it's a nice shortcut for those who don't want to reach over to use the mouse, or more importantly, maybe for somebody who's disabled.